Hello everyone, Bag here. Sparxie is our other new Elation unit coming in 4.0, so if you want to know how to build a team around her, then you've come to the right place. I'm not going to do a full summary of Elation after doing so 2 separate times already, but for a very brief TLDR, having Elation units on the team causes Aha to appear on the action bar, with its speed depending on the speed of the Elation teammates. On Aha's turn, every Elation unit sends out a unique Elation skill that can only be sent out during Aha's turn. Elation units also have their own new type of Elation damage that doesn't scale with attack or damage percent, but they instead work off of a new Elation percent that isn't obtainable through relic main or substats. And Elation also has a stackable resource named Punchline, which also improves Elation damage, which you stack up during the fight with characters' kits. Punchline is consumed on Aha's turn with the sent out Elation skills, before then being given back in the form of a buff called Certified Banger, which acts as a Punchline equivalent for all Elation damage dealt outside of Aha's turn. If you want a more full overview of Elation, I would recommend checking out my Yao Guang guide. We'll still go over any other relevant information about Elation when it is, well, relevant to the tier list. As for how Sparxie works, she is a fire Elation unit who primarily acts as a carry. Her skill acts like Dill, or more so like Currency Wars Dill, consuming up to a limit of 20 skill points to add some scaling and a bounce per skill to her enhanced basic attack, which is otherwise a simple blast attack that does still generate a skill point. Scaling also generates Punchline, with a small chance of instead generating 2 Punchline and 2 SP. This enhanced basic gets Elation damage scaling and regular damage scaling at base, as well as getting more of both per skill usage, meaning that while the majority of her damage is still Elation damage, she can still somewhat benefit from regular damage percent buffs. Her Elation skill that she sends out during Aha's turn is an AoE attack with 20 bounces afterwards, with this Elation skill making up a very large portion of her overall damage. Her Elation skill also gives to Thrill, which is an SP substitute in the same vein as Dill's talent, except without a cap. Her ultimate is a very basic AoE attack that, for now, gives some Punchline and 1 Thrill. Sparxie also has an attack inventing trace, giving her Elation damage percent up to a cap of 3600 attack, as well as a team-wide crit damage buff scaling on currently owned Punchline, and her last trace has additional effects on her ultimate with extra Punchline and Thrill stacks that scales with the amount of Elation allies on the team. Currently, the second part of the second trace that gives 4 Thrill instead of 1 is impossible to trigger as we only have 2 Elation units. And that's Sparxie, a pretty simple kit that involves generating a lot of Punchline to power up her very powerful Elation skill. So let's see who can best support this playstyle. It feels kinda fitting for the Sparxie teammate tier list to start off by talking about the original Sparkle first. First of all, if you didn't know, Sparkle has also been buffed during 4.0. The TLDR of her buffs are better raw buffing, especially when buffing Elation damage. The skill points from her ultimate can overcap, while now generating 6 instead of 4. Her skill's buff lasts the full 2 turns now, and if any ally uses more than 3 SP in 1 turn, her next skill costs 0 SP. She now gets a guaranteed turn 1 ult from her technique, and she now gets 1 energy per SP consumed by the skilled ally. So if you thought the Sparkle in your head that you've been using was going to be good in supporting an SP consuming machine, you now also have to consider just how much better she'll be post Nova Flare buff. As I briefly mentioned, a lot of Sparkle's changes, from losing her Quantum Ally requirement to her talent giving vulnerability instead of damage percent, was done mostly with the intention of making her more synergistic with Sparxie. As such, a lot of Sparkle's strength here should be relatively obvious. Raising the SP cap gives more SP for Sparxie to work with within a single turn, on top of, giving an entire 6 SP per ult with a 2-turn ult rotation. All of that extra skill usage from Sparxie directly translates to more damage, more Punchline, which also means more damage, and more chances to get the 20% chance of the buffed up skill proc. Sparxie's skill is inherently very RNG, so Sparkle gives herself more spins at the slot machine. Isn't that a fun analogy? The more SP Sparxie consumes, the more energy Sparkle gets back, which means more Sparkle ults, which means more skilling. Yes, it's only 1 energy per skill, but if you even get close to the cap of 20 skills in 1 turn, that's still a very non-negligible amount of energy. And to draw the comparison, it's more than what Archer can give her in a single turn. Although speaking of Archer, unlike him, you cannot use ally ultimates once you start using Sparxie's skill. So unfortunately, you can't do the Archer strat of spending your SP, using Sparkle, and then spending 6 more skill points. This isn't as bad as before her buff, since now Sparkle's SP from her ultimate can overcap, so there won't really be any awkward situations where you don't want to Sparkle ult before the carry does your damage, but it is still a bit blech. If Sparxie starts her turn at full SP, and then gets a Sparkle ult, she'll skill down during her turn to 0 SP, basic to generate 1, and then get 6 from the overcap after her turn ends, bringing us back to the cap of 7. Or, well, maybe not, because Sparxie's signature also increases the SP cap per Elation ally, so it's 8 with Sparxie and Sparkle, and 9 with them and Yao Guang. Anyways, this overcapping business at least makes it easier to have consecutive turns of skill spamming, as opposed to how it could feel pre-Sparkle's Nova Flare buff, where a lot of the time you'd have wasted turns without any SP to spend. Beyond all of of these skill point buffing shenanigans, there's also just a lot more basic stuff that Sparkle provides. As post-buff, she really is a top tier in terms of raw damage amp. The 45% attack from her base kit and 40% attack from her E1 that you may have gotten for free can do a lot of legwork for more easily getting Sparxie to 3600 attack, and her ultimate vulnerability debuff also can help the rest of the team's damage, which can be useful for teammates like Tribi or Yao Guang. Sparkle's hyperspeed setup is also just inherently ideal for Elation, as taking turns too fast can burn through the 2-turn certified banger buffs, and if the alternative to a hyperspeed setup is to run speed boots on Sparxie, then like people do with E2 Bronya, we can also attribute the attack from the attack boots as an extra unique boon from Sparkle. Although things can be a bit weird in terms of Sparxie's speed, since there technically is an incentive to give Sparxie some speed for the sake of Aha speed tuning. This is more likely than not worth gearing for, unless if a fight specifically requires that amount of speed on Aha, which is more rare than you'd think considering Aha's action value does not reset between waves, and it will also be even less of a factor when we have future Elation units on the team that can contribute to Aha speed tuning, but for now it is just kind of a weird quirk to contend with. Overall, Sparkle is very comfortably her best in slot teammate for her second team slot, and before we cover her realistic competition, I do want to touch on the other action advancers. Yes, first and foremost, obviously they are much less SP positive than Sparkle, but on top of that, the main thing holding them back is just how Elation works. Elation damage makes up a large portion of Sparxie's damage, so their damage percent buffs are less effective on her compared to a normal carry. It's not a completely dead stat, like how a lot of Harmony buffs are for break carries, for example, but being less efficient isn't great when their competition is especially good at raw buffing. Really, they just don't really provide what Sparxie wants from a teammate at a base level, as their strengths simply are not aligned with her wants. A plug here to subscribe. A full-on Sparxie guide will be coming out in just a few days, so if you're interested in seeing that, or any content like this for future units, then stick around. Alright, back to the vid. If we are looking to replace Sparkle in this team slot, then we are looking at the very familiar generic damage ampers. Once again, we can draw a link to Archer teams, who utilize the same roster of teammates for very similar reasons. They give good amp, they're all generally SP positive, and they all give something unique that actually makes them worth using. Tribi has DDD, so if that or her personal damage in high enemy count fights are impactful enough, then she can be a real difference maker. It should be noted that with how many goddamn bounce attacks Sparxie has in her kit, she is a really inconsistent carry in non-shared HP AoE fights. It's like a Noxa, except way worse since the bounces aren't somewhat predictable. For the 10 million people with E1 Tribi, she will most likely just win out in this competition of Sparkle replacers. Although if DDD isn't doing anything in a given fight, then she loses a lot of what makes her stand out. Cypher is good in fights that can best make use of her damage accumulation, which is very fight dependent with if her ult can or cannot clutch up a cycle. She is also the most SP positive unit here. Silverwolf is good against non-fire weak enemies, and again prefers single target fights. And RMC is able to somewhat replicate Sparkle's action advancing niche, allowing us to either give Sparkle an extra turn in a cycle, or to push her ahead of Aha's turn to get some last minute punchline generation in. Extra turns with Sparxie are a bit dicey, as you need to actually have a decent amount of SP to make that turn do anything, but it is still a clutchable factor that is always nice to have. And also, RMC has the advantage in sustainless teams thanks to the delay in their technique. Obviously, no one can really replace Sparkle's SP niche, but Sparxie can survive with lesser punchline and enhanced basic damage if the raw amp from Sparkle's replacement is good enough. Which also means, again, if you have investment into any of these replacements, then that closes the gap a bit further. So if your question is, can I use Sparxie without Sparkle? The answer is yes, but the lack of her will be felt, especially if you also don't have Sparxie's signature, which would then bring the SP cap all the way down to 5. So really, getting Sparkle for free from the selector for Sparxie is not a bad idea at all. In any case, I think all of these replacements can go into the S- tier. They won't ever be in a best in slot core, unless if you're going sustainless, but they can do their job just fine regardless, which a lot of other supports can't really say here. To go over some other supports, if you're wondering about Cerydra, yeah, she's terrible here. Since Sparxie uses her enhanced basic, Peerage literally does nothing for her, kinda like Dill. Something that is relevant with Cerydra, and will be relevant later on, is that if a unit has a buff that relies on converting one of their own stats, that buff can't then contribute to other stat conversions. So for example, Military Merit's attack buff that relies on Cerydra's attack can't then buff Sparxie's Elation based on Sparxie's attack. It has to be a raw, straight up attack buff, which may or may not be relevant for other supports. Asta exists, actually. Speed matters a lot here for the sake of Aha speed tuning, and for Yao Guang's Elation buff, so giving about 50 of it to the entire team is actually very valuable. Her other main buff is is a straight up attack buff, and she even gives damage bonus to fire allies, which again can help with the non-elation damage in Sparxie's kit. And she's not that bad at using DDD. All of this doesn't put her above the B tier, but for Asta standards, that's way above her usual pay grade. Okay, let's go a bit more rapid fire. Hanya gives SP, speed, and a lot of damage percent. Due to Sparxie not attacking while consuming SP, unlike Archer, Hanya's niche is a lot less valuable here. You can try it, but it's rather unimpressive. Cyrene's ult would be really nice for Yao Guang, but good luck using her in a team completely void of Crisis Airs, where her generic buff to Sparxie would be damage percent. Next, Ranmei gives some nice res pen and speed, but again her large amount of damage percent is kinda wasted here. Pela and Jiaosho are Pela and Jiaosho, which is to say the B tier bandits strike again. Robin's attack buff is mostly a conversion, meaning it's bad here. She gives damage percent, which is bad here. She doesn't have a way to consistently gain energy, which is bad here. And she generates 0 SP, which is bad here. She's still B tier though. You can only put a team-wide 100% action advance so low. Although I should note that Ahad is not affected by action advances. Otherwise, DDD and Robin ults would be by far the most important things in Elation teams by a mile. So yeah, if it wasn't clear, if you want a filler support, go for Archer's collection. Everyone else is either numerically weak or has some big factor holding them back because Elation is weird. The last one I'll mention is Ting Yun, because self-DDD strats are literally never bad, and she can even ult Yao Guang for energy, which can be a difference maker. You get almost no buffs from her in comparison to other teammates in the same team slot, but in terms of raw utility, especially in a sustainless team, she's actually not that bad. After all of this talk about her second team slot, her third team slot is a lot of the same story. You either, again, run one of the generic ampers, or you can run the uncontested best in slot here, Yao Guang. I already made a Yao Guang teammate tier list that was like 70% just talking about how she works with Sparxie, so I will condense things a bit here, and if you want a larger explanation, then boy do I have the video for you. Anyways, Yao Guang's whole thing, besides her generic buffing, is that her very expensive ultimate lets Aha take a free turn. This is the only player-controlled way to get extra turns out of Aha, besides just making him faster. And since a lot of Sparxie's damage is reliant on Aha's turns, this is an extremely important niche for Yao Guang to fill. These free Aha turns don't consume punchline, but they instead work off of a fixed 20 punchline, meaning these free turns might be a bit weaker than normal Aha turns, but on the plus side, they still do give you a 20 stack certified banger state. Since Sparxie also gets 2 thrill per elation skill, and Yao Guang also generates 1 SP per elation skill, this means that every Yao Guang ult also generates an effective 3 SP for Sparxie, which is almost as much as pre-buff Sparkle. Speaking of giving Aha extra turns, having Yao Guang on the team also massively boosts Aha's speed. With just Sparxie, you can expect Aha to have around 100-ish speed. With Yao Guang, that'll instead be anywhere from about 125 to 135, depending on if you decide to give any speed to Sparxie, and on how you gear and invest into your Yao Guang. So for the 120 speed breakpoint for 3-starring Anomaly Arbitration, or for the 133.4 speed breakpoint of acting twice in the first cycle of MOC, Yao Guang existing on the team also gives Aha 1 more turn than you would otherwise get. If Aha is going once per cycle at base, and having Yao Guang can double or triple that number, then I would say that that's pretty dang strong. Granted, as I mentioned earlier, Aha's action value between waves is not reset, so on the second wave of MOC, it'll likely go twice in the first cycle anyways, but still, shut up, it's a good niche. Yao Guang is also the only ally that can actually help stack up the new unique elation stats. Her skill and unique relic set gives a relatively small amount of elation percent, and all of her abilities also generate a relatively small amount of punchline. The quantity of the numbers aren't really too amazing here. It's more of the fact that no one else can even slightly contribute to these buffs, for now. And undiluted buffs like these are more valuable to have a monopoly over as a support. And beyond the punchline that she actually generates, every ultimate from Yao Guang produces the equivalent value of 20 punchline, with the 20 punchline elation skills and 20 punchline certified banger. So if you look at it in that sense, she can more than match the value that Sparkle provides with her uber SP production. The thing that holds back Yao Guang here is just her energy rotation. She has an ult cost of 180, and while her basic does generate 30 energy, and her elation skill generates 5, without her light cone she will be struggling to get a 4-turn ultimate. Although you can get to a 3-turn ultimate with a combination of getting hit, her signature, and some other stuff that we'll talk about later. In my opinion, I think Yao Guang is a lot harder to replace compared to Sparkle for Sparxie. Again, losing Sparkle means a lot less punchline and enhanced basic generation, which at the end of the day is just damage that can be at least somewhat supplemented by raw amp. But losing Yao Guang means less elation skills, which is really hard to lose. And there are no ways to replicate that niche through other units. I don't think Yao Guang is required for Sparxie, but I'll put it like this. With neither Sparkle or Yao Guang, Sparxie will be a rather underwhelming carry. And if you have to choose between using one of them, them, I would always recommend using Yao Guang first. With more Elation units on the team, which seems to be the way Sparxie's team will be headed in the future, with her second trace and S1's Elation teammate conditions, Yao Guang will then be all the more important. There is always the chance that they don't end up on the same best in slot team together once the Elation archetype gets more fleshed out, as I talked a lot about in my 4.0 pull priority video, but the basic fact is that they have enough innate synergy together to where using them together anyways will always be solid. For now, Yao Guang is a game changer, and in the future, at the bare minimum, they will still work very well together. The last role to go over then are the sustains, which is a bit complicated. Let's first talk about Dipped, who is the poster child for that blend of utility that you would want on this team. He's SP positive, he gives good damage through Soul Dragon, and hey, look at that, an attack buff. That's a conversion of his attack. Yeah, so being the bondmate doesn't actually increase Sparxie's Elation. And seeing as how that's a lot of Dip's utility here, and through the fact that his niche with Sunday is also obviously dead here, yeah, his assumed monopoly here might be slipping. This also, like with Sunday, extends to his Lycon's damage percent buff also being a lot worse here. So unless if you got his E1, his standard investment doesn't put him that much more ahead. Still, his buffs at least help Sparxie's non-Elation damage, Soul Dragon will still put in work, and in fights that require high levels of sustain, he is the main guy to call. That is enough to put him at the bottom of the S tier for me at least, but I could honestly see placing him higher or lower. Huohuo, on the other hand, is not who you would think of for an SP hungry team, being one of the most SP hungry sustains period. But then we look at the rest of her kit, and yeah, 20% team-wide energy and a 40% attack buff are both really good here. Energy helps Sparkle generate more SP, it makes a 3-turn ult rotation more possible for Yao Guang, and it helps Sparxie generate more thrill with her ultimate. If Huohuo is the difference maker of getting an extra ult on Yao Guang over the course of a fight, then she is at least probably the best sustain that you can bring to the team. 40% attack is basically the same as Sparkle's E0 attack buff, and while its 2-turn duration is really not that great, remember that we're not playing a -1 speed setup here. Sparxie is a lot of the time taking 2 turns per cycle anyways, unless if you're giving her a 3rd turn with a really fast Sparkle or something like an extra mem action event, meaning that while this attack buff won't have perfect uptime, it can still be somewhat relied on if you need it to get closer to her attack benchmark. The basic idea is that Huohuo can have a higher ceiling when played well, while Dipped is more comfortable, and again, if a fight is very hard hitting, then Huohuo sustaining by spamming her skill isn't really that acceptable here, which would generally make Dipped a lot better to use. I do also want to quickly mention that her E1 is pretty good here, with its relevant speed buff and in making her more SP positive. It's not anywhere near a priority here, but if you do have it then she's even better. The other sustains are really easy to place. Gallagher has double cripple quo strats and is uber SP positive, but I think that matters less than the other benefits from the above sustains, especially when he's only uber SP positive when he doesn't need to use his skill to heal. And with Sparkle here, he'll have the same problem of keeping her alive as he does in Archer teams. Everyone else has variable levels of SP positiveness and buffs, but generally, besides Huohuo, if you know how a sustain works in an Archer team, it won't be that different here, as their jobs are pretty simple. I want to end things off here by really hammering home that Sparxie's teams are for sure going to be shaken up a lot in the next few patches, especially in 4.2. So while I think her best in slot team right now is solid to invest into, you might want to wait to see if future information will be available during their banners before you fully commit your resources into any one character. Going to the channel member corner, we have Bullet Sponge 7 as our next new 6-month member. Thank you, as always, so much for your support, and well, with that, expect the Sparxie guide to come out within the next week, and until then, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye!